Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on this side to add my voice to those of my colleagues in pointing out the many deficiencies of this budget that was presented to us here. But, Mr. Speaker, I've heard a lot about the pandemic of the Zika virus that is sweeping across Latin America and the Caribbean, and about its possible affliction of Guyana. But it seems as though we do not have only the Zika pandemic to deal with in this country. We have an epidemic fast becoming a pandemic, an epidemic of make-believe in this government. An epidemic that is sweeping across the cabinet and many of those who hold government offices today. A cocoon-like behavior, thinking that because they live the good life, because they're there, then everyone else must be living the good life too. And what we find characterizing this new virus sweeping our country is boastful, bombastic, pompous language. It's our time now. We are here. We'll do what we want. We suspend the standing orders of Parliament to pass bills willy-nilly. We will avoid tender processes, and we will take away your subsidies from the subsidies from the pensioners, and they should be grateful because we have removed the licenses for them to drive. They don't have to pay any longer. We know better for you. And this is the attitude that seems to be developing in our country. But as we talk about the good life, and that is, my dear friend, in 1994, I think, or 2004, Good Life Beckons came from an article by Kenneth Galbraith. I know Winston, the Honorable Member Winston Jordan must have been reading it, and he forgot to attribute it to Kenneth Galbraith. But let us examine the good life for whom. And so today, as we stand here, I would like to welcome the young woman too, Anissa Thomas, to the chambers of this assembly. And I know you're from the Essequibo Coast, and I'm very happy that the Honorable Member, Mr. Harman, invited you here. But you will know, Anissa, that on the Essequibo Coast now, where the main activity is rice growing, and a substantial part of the disposable income of the community, the entire coast, comes from rice growing. And the doldrums on the Essequibo Coast, the hardships that people are faced with, the market vendors who are complaining, the taxi drivers who can't get business anymore, the workers who are there now who have lost their jobs because of this government saying that the rice industry, which provides the bulk of the employment for people in your region, they have now said to this nation, Anissa, that it is not their business. It is not their business. Mr. Speaker, and I'm very happy she is here. Mr. Speaker, we sit in the chamber here, and as we talk about the good life, and we enjoy the large salary increases for ourselves, etc., and the enhanced per diem policy that was changed in June of this year, there is a community, in fact, several communities now, just a short distance from here, Mr. Speaker, across the river, who now, the people who live in those communities are worried about their future. They're worried about whether they will have a job tomorrow. They're worried about the future of their children, whether they'd be able to send them to school. They're worried, the market vendors are worried there too. Those people are not talking about the good life, Mr. Speaker. They are worried about their future, a future that this government and the uncertainty has visited upon them because of a callous decision to close the Wales estate. Callous decision. And Mr. Speaker, just yesterday, I met with the Guyana Taxi Drivers Association, and they told me they have 1,400 vehicles. And that means 1,400 drivers. And they said to me that because of the measures in this budget, the cost of acquisition of their vehicles now will go up at least by 30%. And many of those drivers now are worried that in this depressed economy, they're not going to be able to make a return on their capital. Many of them will lose their jobs too. And so, how do you think? Do you think they're enjoying the good life? They're worried that from a short period henceforth, that when the ban on used tires come in place, that their costs will go up, their costs will triple, and that they will not be able to conduct their trade. So they are not now, thousands of them, and I'm just speaking about the small group I met, they are not happy about this good life. They're wondering what this government is really talking about when it says the good life. And they're questioning, for whom is this good life going to materialize? Mr. Speaker, the pensioners themselves across the coast who have lost their water subsidy now, and who have lost their electricity subsidy, and many of them cannot, from the meager increase that they got this year, recognize that they are in a worse off position on a net basis. Mr. Speaker, do you think they are happy and the good life beckons to them? No. The answer is no. And Mr. Speaker, although we've heard from the ministers here about no known job loss, but you talk to the retail trade, and I don't want to call the names of the companies, but I can tell you many companies that have had to lay off workers because they cannot, the sales cannot meet the cost of their wage bill. And Mr. Speaker, the thousands of people who are working in the contracting industry, whose jobs have dried up because that industry has shrunk. Do you think that they are concerned about their good life and they're happy and they're listening to us here today? They're listening and hearing this government speak about the good life, and they're wondering, where is this good life? And then compounding all of this, Mr. Speaker, compounding all of it, we have heard that after the local government elections, that increased valuations would be done for their properties, and that they will have to pay higher taxes on their properties. and right across this country. People in the city, people across the countries, all the NDCs, will now have to pay higher taxes. I'd say to them, the best way of ensuring that you don't have to pay higher taxes is make sure that you don't vote for the other side. Because if you vote for them in the local government elections, Mr. Speaker, you're voting for higher taxes. Mr. Speaker, I've heard the honorable member, Mr. Harman, re-embrace their manifesto. And I thought they had distanced themselves from the promises made there. Because in that manifesto, we heard about the reduction of VAT, but in this budget, we see over a $5 billion increase in the collection of value-added tax. Mr. Speaker, if you want to make a point of order, go get up, Winston, and let me show you the section. Yes, okay. So you don't know what's in here, but Mr. Speaker, sorry about that. Mr. Speaker, manifesto promise, reduction of the value-added tax. What we see in this budget, an increase of over $5 billion in the collection of VAT. We have heard about this substantial increase for public servants. And it is you can list the entire history of the PPP in office and how much money the public servants got, what the percentage increase was. But the wages and salaries in 1992, the minimum wage was $25 US when we took office. $25 US. And I will come to that in a moment, Mr. Speaker. But we've heard about this collective bargaining. And I'm glad that the government has reintroduced collective bargaining. And I hope that the public service unions will request at least a 50% increase in wages and salaries. Because if the ministers got a 50% increase in wages and salaries on a $579,000 base, then at least the public servants can get a 50% on a $75,000 base. And so I hope when they come to the table and make that argument that they would not be told that their proposal is unrealistic. And we have heard further, Mr. Speaker, that the commission, we have heard further, Mr. Speaker, that they have a commission of inquiry into the public service. And a lot of these things have to wait the commission of inquiry. And Mr. Speaker, the experience of one commission of inquiry has shown this government's attitude to its own COI. This government spent a large sum of money. In our estimation, in the first few months of the COI on Gaisuko, they spent over $50 million. So we believe it's over $70 million to do a commission of inquiry. The commission was presented, and then we heard that, Mr. Speaker, we heard that the commission of inquiry and its recommendations are not gospel, that we can move away from it. We can put in place a COI, argue to the nation that we are waiting the recommendations of the COI. When it comes in and we don't like it, then we say it's not gospel. We move away from it. How can the public servants believe that the COI and its recommendations on their public service will be implemented in by this government. And Mr. Speaker, when a government loses trust, or the trust of the people, then we have a serious problem. Mr. Speaker, we have heard our Minister, the Honorable Member, Mr. Harman, gave us a treatise on why we should be grateful in this country because our neighbors are doing bad economically. Mr. Speaker, it is some of the most uncreative arguments I've heard in the economic sphere. Mr. Speaker, the structure of the Brazilian economy is very different than Guyana's economy. Mr. Speaker, Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago, and Suriname, these three countries have a huge reliance on the oil and gas sector for their revenue. In Guyana's case, we have saved $200 million in 2015 in terms of lower import costs. In 2014, it was $562 million US dollars, and in 2015, it was $355 million to import fuel. We saved $200 million US dollars, $40 billion because of lower fuel prices. That should be an impetus to the economy. We should be doing better. That is the only reason why the balance of payment improved. And so how can you compare us with the three neighbors who rely on oil and gas for their revenue, the bulk of their revenue, and then say they're doing badly, so we should be doing badly? This is the most uncreative argument that I've heard in a long time. Mr. Speaker, the only Mr. Speaker, we've heard from the same honorable member, Mr. Harman, who just spoke, that the Transparency International Index, that he outlined the history of this index, Mr. Speaker. And what happened is that he didn't say much about the slippage and how this slippage came last year. The slippage came largely because of the Feathers-Lloyd issue. The Feathers-Lloyd issue, where a huge contract was awarded by this government. In fact, it's not awarded as yet. An MOU was signed. And Mr. Speaker, they had questions about GPL. And therefore, there was a major slippage because of these two issues. We have seen Transparency International Guyana write extensively about this. So why is there a slippage? We have already, in the first 8 months, we've already seen a slippage in the Transparency International Index, Corruption Perception Index. It's under this government. And Mr. Speaker, I dare say that they have lost, the members on the other side have lost every moral authority to speak about corruption when they voted against the motion that we presented to this parliament that would have seen the past 10 years of tax records of every member of this parliament made public, and would have seen the past 10 years of submission to the Integrity Commission report.
I'll remember you rise.
Getting on the
Speaker. 40B, explanation. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member has quoted extensively from some figures which I gave, pointing out that the corruption index for 2015 had Guyana standing at 119. The point I am making, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, now that the noise has subsided, I can correct.
Honorable member,
Yes.
Honorable Sir Joseph Harman, you rise on a point of order,
Yes,
sir?
please, Mr. Speaker. It has to do with the content, Mr. Speaker, of the presentation of the honorable member. 41.6 content. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member has actually quoted the 2015 figures as 119, as I indicated. The honorable member went on to say that the figures have actually slipped. The question is whether, in fact, what is it he's relying on for us to say that it is slipped? Where is the facts? Use some figures and get it good. Bring the facts.
Honorable members, we still have other speakers. We cannot start celebrating now. So let us try to maintain some order. I don't say decorum, but order in the House while we continue the speeches. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I return to the point that I was making, that the members on the other side have lost every moral authority to speak about corruption. When they voted against the motion that would have seen the tax records of every member of parliament for the past 10 years made available to the public. And they would have seen also the statement, the declarations to the Integrity Commission for the past 10 years made public. And had they been able to see those, then they would have decided, the nation would have decided who is corrupt and who is not. Because, Mr. Speaker, I'm aware that many members, contrary to the law of this country, have not submitted their statements to the Integrity Commission. And they're choosing conveniently to decide when they want to do so, in the future. Well, the law has been in place since 2000. And Mr. Speaker, there is a jail term. There is a jail term for those who have not submitted to. They have not submitted. If you're convicted, then you can go to prison too, Mr. Speaker. And so be careful how you talk about prisons, Honorable Member, Mr. Harman. Mr. Speaker, may I just come back to the budget speech? And I was very pleased that the Minister of Finance sought to give us a picture, paint a picture of what's taking place around the globe. And it is a trying time in the globe. We have had stock market volatility of unbelievable proportions. We have had low commodity prices. We've had a slowdown in China, which has affected global demand. We have had many other exchange rate volatility, etc. So the minister rightfully said, given the structure of our economy on page 5, with its heavy dependence on primary products, in the expected mix of soft commodity prices and continued tumbling oil prices, focus has to be on accelerating production and through our various policy measures and reforms, stimulating growth and exports. Mr. Speaker, he then goes on, it is against this background I'll now review the performance of the economy. One would have thought that if the Minister of Finance points out something of such a fundamental nature, the global environment that we will have to construct our national economic policy in for the upcoming year, he would have, and given that we have a very open economy, if you go to the section at the back and you add imports and exports under the balance of payment, you will see it's over 100% of GDP. That's an indicator of the openness of the economy. So the external environment will definitely affect us. So he should have gone on to say the channels of transmission into our economy. One, how are soft global prices going to flow into our local economy? And how will it affect our productive sectors? And therefore, what do we do about this to insulate our productive sectors? Then there is an interest rate channel through which international volatility can flow to the country. We've heard a lot about quantitative easing. We've heard about now the United States moving away from that policy which can cause interest rates to rise. Will this have an impact on us? And especially because our economy is not greatly integrated into that of the world, unlike Brazil. So exploring that channel of transmission of global volatility, how could falling then deciding what we do about it? And then how would falling international prices or the threat of deflation affect us? So, Mr. Speaker, we have not heard or had been benefited from any analysis of any of these issues, nor do we have. And because we have not analyzed the issue properly, we cannot come up with a coherent set of policies to insulate us from the global environment and therefore continue prosperity in Guyana. Mr. Speaker, I'll just give you an example. Now, everyone knows that the world today, the biggest worry is deflation, one of the biggest worries. The head of the IMF, the managing director, spoke recently about the threats of deflation and how it could derail global economic recovery. In the United States of America, in the inflation, although the target in the European Union, in Britain, and the United States of America is 2% inflation, they're all now 0.2, 0.3, 0.5% inflation. Low inflation is a problem. Deflation is a problem. And why is it a problem? Because it harms investment. A dollar earned tomorrow is worth less than the dollar today. Nobody wants to invest. If commodity prices are cheaper tomorrow than today, then nobody wants to consume. It's a big threat. We have seen from the numbers, the Minister of Finance speak about last year we had deflation in our economy. First time for a very, very long time. And so what is the policy response? Is this deflation temporary? Is it temporary? So if it's temporary, that's fine. But is it a structural type of deflation? And Mr. Speaker, nothing in this budget. So what the minister moved on to, he simply said 2% target for inflation today. This is, Mr. Speaker, a shot in the dark type of policy. It is a shot in the dark type of policy. It has no bearing to the threats of what we face, Mr. Speaker. So we have seen again the same minister, Mr. Speaker, having said that the external environment is so bad. He spoke now, Mr. Speaker, about this year, and this is when he comes on page 62. Mr. Speaker, having emerged from the disruptive year that was 2015, the clear expectation is that 2016 will be a year of recovery. On one hand, he said, oh, the global environment is so bad and it will affect us. And this year, it will be recovering. But let's see what is recovering, Mr. Speaker. Let's see about this wonderful 4.4% growth that he is projected this year. Mr. Speaker, agriculture, fishing, and forestry sector. Get what is the growth? It's 0.3%. Now, agriculture, fishing, forestry employs tens of thousands of people. Tens of thousands of people. Yet the minister believes that there is a major recovery. Now, if you can't acknowledge that one of the biggest sectors of our country is in a crisis, and you're hiding behind a macro growth figure, then you cannot come up with policy measures to address that sector, to ensure that the growth goes on. So the analysis, the policy measures follow the analyses, Mr. Speaker. But if the analysis is absent or flawed, then you cannot have the coherent set of policy measures. Mr. Speaker, the manufacturing sector will shrink. The manufacturing sector will shrink by 0.7%. Where in the budget is any measure to help the manufacturing sector? Not a single measure to help the manufacturing sector. Services will grow by 4%, Mr. Speaker. And then he comes to the mining sector. The only thing, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Member Winston Jordan, comes to the gold mining sector, Mr. Speaker, and he says most of the growth will come from the mining and quarrying sector, and the bulk of it will come from growth. And guess what? The bulk of it will come, the Honorable Member, Mr. Harman, from two investments that started under the People's Progressive Party government. The bulk of it. So we can say that in manufacturing, a decline. In agriculture, a decline. Services will grow minimally. Construction in a small way. Gold mining will grow, but you have tens of thousands of small miners facing bankruptcy now and having their equipment being repossessed. And we don't see a problem with this. This is the great economic recovery. This is the great economic recovery that we're talking about. Analysis. You have to do something for these sectors. You have to understand that there are people who work in mining and people who work in agriculture, producers, and the people who work in manufacturing, and they need help from this budget too, not special interests, not cutting alcohol prices, not special interests. Mr. Speaker, since our dear Vice President just said Columbus, but yesterday our dear Vice President spoke about inheritance, and that every government inherits from the preceding one a set of policy measures and programs that sometimes they continue, and we should now make a big deal of this. And I accept that. But Mr. Speaker, what is the inheritance that the PPP got? And our dear Minister Harmon. Let me just accept, yes, our dear Minister Harmon outlined a long number of years, and I wish he had started the time series data that he subjected to the Parliament to. I wish he had started it a little bit earlier. Had he done that, had he gone to 92, he would have seen that the inheritance that and we are very grateful. We are grateful. We're extremely grateful. Yeah. The same. And we are extremely grateful to the Honorable Member, Vice President Carl Greenidge, for an affidavit that he gave when we continued to take up the case of green mining construction. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in that affidavit, in paragraph 16 of the affidavit, the Honorable Vice President said, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Vice President at that time, in that affidavit, in paragraph 16 of it, said the following things. He said that our debt to GDP ratio was 925%. We've heard now that last year it was 50%. And he said, Mr. Speaker, that the servicing of that debt took up 150% of revenue. Now, yes, Mr. Speaker. Yeah.
Withdraw what?
Yeah.
Withdraw what?
Yes, yes. Mr. Speaker, I have the affidavit here. I will.
Point of order 41-6, please.
Honourable Member, Mr. Jagdeo,
Yes.
there's a point of order being raised.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as on the question of content, 41-6.
It's in one of my orders.
The document to which the distinguished member makes reference has no statement by me speaking to the payment of debt amounting to any sum above 100%. The Speaker himself had an exchange with Professor Helliner pointing out that that was nonsense.
This is a point of order, Mr.
The point of order is that he's fabricated. He has imputed to me a figure he fabricated himself. He has imputed a figure he fabricated himself. Let him cite the word. Read the document to us. Fabricating. Rest yourself, man.
Please proceed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the servicing of that debt, yeah. Mr. Speaker, I cited paragraph 16 of the affidavit. Yeah. That is it?
Honourable Member, if you would cite, then you should give full details to us.
Yes, but it is the affidavit, Mr. Speaker. I have it here. The page, I will find the page, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, is the honourable member denying that he said this?
Honourable member, you should clarify this
Yes, I
particular
am
point.
clarifying, and it is from the affidavit. Is the honorable member denying that he said in the affidavit that the affidavit is a public document, Mr. Speaker? I will submit it after I finish speaking. Mr. Speaker, that is the rule. I will have to submit it immediately. And is the honorable member, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the practice is you submit immediately after. Yeah. It's a second. Mr. Speaker, the practice is
No practice.
unless the practice will change for me now, Mr. Speaker. I will not withdraw because
Honourable Mr. Gray.
Mr. Speaker, we have been in situation. Last year got to do with it. What's the matter with you? What is the matter with you? What is the matter with you? Huh?
Honourable members, there is a matter before the floor, but I know the temptation is for everyone else to resolve it, except the Speaker. But let us be patient. I thank you. Honourable member, the anxiety to resolve it, we will deal with that. So please let us do that. Members, the practice is that whenever a member of the National Assembly reads a document or an extract thereof in the Assembly, he must identify the document. I thank the Honourable Member, but you will let the Speaker do this now. I did not join you earlier, so please let me do this. Whenever a member does, he will identify the document or the extract by stating its title and by furnishing other relevant particulars, such as its date, page, paragraph number, etc., and make the document or extract available immediately thereafter to the parliamentary reporters. Honourable Mr. Bharrat Jagdeo,
Mr. Speaker, it's an affidavit.
You are to comply with these.
Yes, sure. Mr. Speaker, it's an affidavit of Carl B. Greenidge. It was made for the International Chamber of Commerce arbitration case number 7630 CK and 7640 CK. It's paragraph 5, Mr. Speaker, and paragraph 16, I'll come to that in a moment. But the paragraph 5 says, Guyana is one of the poorest countries in the world and the second poorest in the Western Hemisphere. As a consequence, it is classified by the World Bank as an IDA-eligible country, requiring grants and highly concessional loans for development purpose.
Honorable members, we cannot conduct ourselves this way.
Mr. Speaker.
Let me assure you that the Speaker will not be persuaded beyond what he believes and truly believes to be the right way. So do not strain your voices too much. Allow me to do this. Honorable member, you have a point of order?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Point of explanation, what is it?
No
Please tell us.
explanation. Mr.
And then let us
Speaker,
start.
the distinguished member on the other side quoted a specific quote, and continuing on the old point of order, quoted a specific figure. He does not have to read the entire document. The specific figure, I'm challenging a specific figure. There's a specific figure, and he hasn't got there yet.
Honorable, could we hear what your point of, is the point that you
Yes, I would like the reference in paragraph 16 in which I claimed that 192% of revenues had been paid by way of debt service.
That's what he has to do.
Honorable member.
Yeah.
The offending or what is being challenged is the reference which you would have given. Please,
Mr. Speaker,
what you would have given
right.
in relation to 100 and...
Yes. Mr. Speaker, it is the paragraph I'm reading. I'm not reading the whole document. Paragraph 5. I'm confining myself to paragraph 5, which has that section in it.
Is that?
Mr. Speaker, by 19...
Honorable member,
what is
let us have this. Let us speak. You are on the floor, or it's a point of order, sir?
If it pleases you, sir.
It would please me if I know if it's a point of order or otherwise.
Point of order, standing order 40A. Contents 41.6. Mr. Speaker, the point of order taken by Mr. Greenwich related to paragraph 16 and the specific figure quoted. And the honorable member and leader of the opposition must read that specifically. He can't go all over the place.
Must read it.
Honorable member, there's an expression, over talk.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
You are saying that the particular figure, the reference to it, that is fine. The rest is for me to decide.
I appreciate that, Mr.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for protecting me from the thought police in here. By 1989, Guyana's external debt to gross domestic product ratio was approximately 925%, with approximately US $1.9 billion in debt, including $1.14 billion in arrears, owed across the spectrum to international institutions, foreign country donors, commercial banks, and other creditors. In 1990, the external debt to export ratio was 951%. So not just GDP, but to this. Between 1986 and 1990, Guyana's average annual debt service payments were 153% of fiscal revenues. Mr. Speaker, I was generous. I said 150. I was generous to the member. Honorable member. Mr. Speaker, if the honorable member seems to have forgotten what he signed on to and his own affidavit, but I have it here before us, Mr. Speaker. May I continue, Mr. Speaker? Now that we are talking about the inheritance that I wanted to talk about, since the honorable member Joe Harmon started the time series data, so I just gave two figures. Just imagine that inheritance that the PPP started with. And just imagine what was the inheritance in terms of public debt today, from 925% of GDP to 50% of GDP, from 153% of revenue to service debt to about 5% of revenue to service debt. I would dare say, Mr. Speaker, this is a good inheritance. This is an excellent inheritance. Mr. Speaker, may I also talk a bit about the inheritance in terms of commercial interest. At that time, the weighted average interest in the commercial banks was 35%. Imagine borrowing at 35% to start your business. Today, it is, based on the minister's figure, it's 10%. Now, this has changed the environment. Mr. Speaker, at that time, in 1992, the reserves in the central bank was about $150 million, Mr. Speaker. Today, when we left last year, the reserves were close to 650, in fact, close to 700 million US dollars. The fiscal deficit was cut from 25% of GDP to the minister boasted to a low level last year was 2% of GDP. What was it, Winston? Perfect. No. Mr. Speaker, I
must remind the honourable member that the speaker is of this.
Mr. Speaker, I'm addressing you, not Jordan. Yes. The honourable member is trying to distract me to engage him in a conversation. Mr. Speaker, may I tell you a bit about the environment that we left to? We passed a slew of legislation in the 23 years of the PPP to modernize the financial architecture of the country. A new insurance legislation, new Companies Act, the Financial Institutions Act, a new Bank of Guyana Act, new Procurement Act. We established the Revenue Authority. We moved to program budgeting. We computerized the accounting functions of the Accountant General. Mr. Speaker, these are just some of the things that we did. There are 25 pieces of legislation that we passed to modernize the financial architecture of the country. And I would say that's a good inheritance too. That's a good inheritance. And the per capita GDP was about $300 US. Mr. Speaker, the per capita GDP today, when the new government took office, is over $3,000 US. That is a good inheritance. And at that time, Mr. Speaker, we waited a week to get power in the country because the entire power infrastructure was down. Today, GPL is functioning well and has just accumulated close to $11 billion in a bank account because of not adjusting the fuel prices, Mr. Speaker, in good shape. And, Mr. Speaker, the entire physical infrastructure of the country was in a state of disrepair. We not only fixed the first generation set of infrastructure, but we had moved on to a second generation set of infrastructure that would have changed the nature of the country and the wealth creation possibilities of Guyana. So, Mr. Speaker, I can say that the PPP left a good inheritance. And secondly, that all this talk about the PPP leaving a bankrupt economy was just talk, Mr. Speaker, because there's no way we could have left a bankrupt economy and the Minister of Finance 9 months later could have come and presented and boasted about presenting the biggest budget ever in the history of our country. Could not. Could not. And so let us put that myth, the myth to rest. The myth of this, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are several things that were mentioned in the budget. Mr. Speaker, the first is that when we talk about transparency, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance spoke extensively about the revenue agencies and collecting more revenue and ensuring that people comply with their tax obligations. But let us see what's happening in the country at this point in time in our revenue agency. We do not have a substantive Commissioner General. Do not have a substantive Deputy Commissioner General. We have just seen from a public statement that I have here, Mr. Speaker, that I will give, issued by the former Commissioner General, that I will submit to the office, to the Parliament, the clerk. That Commissioner General, who had started his career in the PNC and worked through the entire PPP era, was recently replaced. And he made 4 very telling accusations in a public statement, Mr. Speaker. And I hope that the international community is paying close attention to what a technical person who's worked all his life in collecting revenue said. He said, first of all, that I was requested. It's not here. He said, I was requested to rehire people.
Honorable Member, as a speaker, I must tell you that I am not well disposed to quotations from public servants or quotations about public servants in this House.
Mr. Speaker, this person is no longer employed with the government. He is the Revenue Authority is not a traditional public service. Secondly, this is in the public domain. It has been reported in all of the national newspapers. It's the statement made by the Commissioner, a copy of which I have here, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed, Honorable.
Yes. The matter has been reported. That the Commissioner General said, Mr. Speaker, the former Commissioner General, I have been asked to rehire people who have been fired in the past for corruption. We need to know in this House, will the Minister of Finance in his speech this afternoon tell us, give us a list of those people who have been rehired, who were replaced in the past by the board because of acts of corruption. Mr. Speaker, the Commissioner General said, I have been prevailed upon. I've been prevailed upon to settle tax cases for individuals worth billions of dollars of foregone, which would result in billions of dollars of foregone revenue. He further said, I've been asked to promote people who are not qualified. And there have been people who are photocopying files of various persons. And he mentioned one person, a member of this National Assembly, and I will not name him. But he mentioned a member of this National Assembly. The files, Mr. Speaker, when a former commissioner of a revenue agency that is so critical to the collection of our revenue and to ensuring that more taxes are collected, make these charges, then they have to be investigated thoroughly, because these are precisely the points we've been making about the lack of transparency by this government. Are the people who are now benefiting from tax settlements political investors? Are they political investors? And what's the purpose of photocopying and taking out of the agency tax files of members of different groups? Well, at least one, a minister including, a vice president. And yes.
Honourable member, I do not direct you. I do not direct you as to how you should present your statement. Okay. But I do believe you.
I withdraw the vice president.
You should. I do believe that it might be helpful if you move on from that particular
Mr. Speaker,
issue. None of this is tested in this House.
Yeah.
It's being tested in this House.
Mr. Speaker,
and my discomfort is not lessened by massaging it. So please, I would suggest.
Yeah, but given the budget is about revenue, a critical part of revenue and tax collections, my point, Mr. Speaker, that these are ominous signs. These are ominous signs for how this government will manage the agency. Mr. Speaker, moving on, we heard from the Minister of Finance again that the cost of generating power is 28 cents per kilowatt hour. Mr. Speaker, I have before me the first quarter report of the GPL to the Minister for 2015. And at that time, when fuel prices were $70 per barrel, the production cost on average was 11 cents, but that excluded amortization, which is about 2 cents per kilowatt hour. So the total cost of power generation was 13 cents in March of 2015, when fuel prices were $70 a barrel. Fuel prices have now gone down. The last figure, the crude has gone down below 30, but the last figure I got from GPL is $45. That means that the cost of generation now, including the amortization cost, will be about 9 cents per kilowatt hour. Total cost. The minister said 28 cents, 3 times more. 28 cents, Mr. Speaker. But I was wondering why this big discrepancies. Now, if the Minister of Finance comes to the Parliament in an area this critical and presents a figure that is so patently wrong, there must be a reason for this, Mr. Speaker. I cannot believe that given all the debate about the hydropower in this country, the cost of generation, given the minister's statement last year that it would be criminal to go ahead with the purchasing of 1,000 gigawatt hours because it will cost us $2.6 billion over 20 years, that it would be criminal to do that, that the minister had to know the real figures to make such assertive statements. So,
Point of clarification, Mr. Speaker. For 1B. I think the exact quote from last year's budget speech, and I'm sure the honorable member has it, is that in its current conceptualization, it will be criminal to proceed with the Amalia project. Okay? That was criminal.
I thank the honorable member for his explanation. Please proceed.
yeah, Mr. Speaker, numbers were used. And so our argument, Mr. Speaker, all along has been that the cost of the hydropower, first of all, $165 million will come from the government, of which $100 million would have come from Norway. And close to $700 million would be in private investment. And the price of power would have been about 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And that is guaranteed capacity. That is guaranteed capacity. So if you buy 1,000 gigawatt hours, which is the average production of a mile, looking at the peak season and the low season, it will cost us about $100 million US, compared to the 19.5 cents per kilowatt hour at 2012 prices for fuel, at that price for fuel. So that was our argument. In 2012, when the fuel was at the peak, the cost per generation was 19.5 cents. Couldn't be 28 cents. So, Mr. Speaker, we now heard in this budget that the Inter-American Development Bank is doing a study that will determine the appropriate power mix for the future. And there, a decision on a mile will be made in that context. And that is fine, Mr. Speaker. But why, if that study on the power mix is being made now for the future, why this indecent haste to conclude a power purchase agreement? What is driving this? Especially at about 13, 14 cents per kilowatt hour, above the price that we are generating at now, especially in light of the fact that this is not guaranteed capacity, because the wind power, there was a study done in 2013 by a Dutch company that used a mile as the balancing capacity. A study has to be done to show that whether the Wärtsiläs, a technical study, to show whether they can be the balancing capacity. If you buy 25 megawatts of new power, wind power, you also have to invest in at least 25 megawatts of fossil fuel, so that if the wind goes down to zero, because it's variable, a mile is guaranteed capacity. This is not guaranteed capacity. Mr. Speaker, clearly the concept, if the Minister of Public Works, the honorable member, asked me such a question, that there is a huge difference between spinning reserves, that you have to keep those sets on when you have fossil fuel sets to deal with the wind farm. You don't have to keep that on when you have the hydropower. It's guaranteed capacity. And they should just talk. I can talk to the technical people and understand this. Why is this government not doing this? And Mr. Speaker, is this another project? Are we moving forward on this project because another political investor heads this this proposal. Mr. Speaker, I've repeatedly asked this House,
Honourable members, it has been brought to my attention that visitors to the chamber have been using their cell phones. It was put to me that they've been using the phones to make recordings. This should stop immediately. This should stop immediately. But persons who feel that they must are free to leave the chamber now. But they cannot remain and indulge in recordings of honourable members. This is the only time I will speak about this. I thank you. Please proceed.
We have argued that the cost of power should go down tremendously because of the adjustment in fuel prices. Mr. Speaker, I would request the Minister of Finance to table in this Parliament the growth in the bank account, the sum of money that GPL has accumulated now in their bank account because of the difference in the fuel prices falling and them not adjusting the rates. I would dare say, Mr. Speaker, it's close to $11 billion that should be in the pockets of ordinary citizens through lower electricity tariffs. GPL is now keeping this there. Honorable Minister, this would be the ultimate stimulus. If you give it to people, this back to the people, they will spend this money in the economy. We can't just park it in the coffers of GPL.
Honourable member, according to the list I have, you have 5 minutes more.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, I had a discussion with you, and I publicly said on the floor that we had not agreed for the timing for the Leader Opposition. But I'd also had a discussion with you where I said there was no agreement on the time. And therefore, I'm moving a motion for the extension. I'm calling for the extension of the time for the Leader Opposition, allow him to complete his speech and presentation. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member. Please continue.
Right, thank you. Mr. Speaker, also, we have heard a lot about the IDB's involvement in the project, and the IDB has never supported this project because they found it not feasible. So what I've brought today is a copy of the mandate letter that the Inter-American Development Bank had signed in January 20, 2015 with the investors. This was signed by Hans Schultz, the General Manager, Structured and Corporate Finance Department, Inter-American Development Bank. And I plan to give this to the clerk. So this document should put to rest the role of the Inter-American Development Bank in the process of developing the Amila hydropower. Mr. Speaker, I wish also now to move on to the sugar industry. And Mr. Speaker, this is the most callous decision, precipitous decision, unthinking decision of a government that really does not care for people. Today, many workers are on the breadline. But what is more worrying to me, Mr. Speaker, is how the government approached this issue. The Ministry of Agriculture issued a statement which can be found on their website, which claimed that this decision had nothing to, had nothing to do, Mr. Speaker, with the Commission of Inquiry. That in the action plan of the Gaisuco, the management plan, they had intended to close Whale Estate. The union, Nasi and Gau, went to meet the management after the announcement was made. And they were told that this decision was made by the board. So we heard the decision was made by the company, their management, then we heard it was made by the board, and then we heard subsequently, recently by President Granger, that it was a decision made at the cabinet. So, Mr. Speaker, 3 sets of explanation. And this decision had to be made somewhere else, because the indisputable fact is that if it was part of the management plan, then there were 2 weeks prior to the announcement, the precipitous announcement of the closure, they wouldn't have been tilling land at Wales, and they wouldn't have been investing in that, because it would not have been part of their action plan and their plan for the year. But why does the government feel that it has to kick around the responsibility for closing Wales? Because they recognize that this decision is not only an unhealthy one, but it will have severe consequences on people's lives. And Mr. Speaker, when you appoint 10 persons who are supposed to be the most preeminent minds in the sugar industry or the development of sugar, and when they spend 6 months debating the issue and 8 of them vote in favor of non-closure of any estate, and they submit this document to you, and then the government takes it, throws it in the rubbish bin, and then wants us to discuss it at the Economic Services Committee. Throws it. It's garbage now, the COI report. Why does this have to happen? And the approach is so callous. It is like just announcements, you know, on a website. Post the future of 2,000 workers and 20,000 people just callously on a website. We're going to shut it down. The approach is what bothers me a lot. Mr. Speaker, when in 1985 the factory was closed at Diamond, the fields were not closed. And by the time the numbers dwindled from about 1,200 to 300, and Houston Estate was operating on the East Bank. And Houston Estate got out of sugar and went into cattle, diversified. And the government at that time, because they were arguing that it was a far distance to transport the cane, wanted to get out of sugar on the East Bank. We named a committee headed by a board member, Mr. Raghurai, who was also a preeminent agriculturalist. And we invited the 2 unions, Nasi and Gau, to be part of a team that visited every area, looked at the field data. They talked to the workers. They look about the deterioration in the quality of the cane because it had to be moved a long distance by waterway because it's connected. And then that decision was made. And then it was put to the workers that they should move to LBI, 300 of them. And they said, many of them said, no, it's beyond 10 miles from our workplace, and under our laws, we can take severance. Many of them took the severance, but many of them were re-employed. The approach was different. And the same thing with LBI. When LBI, we had to close the factory. There were about 250 workers there. But we had expanded the cane cultivations in Enmore, and there was a new packaging plant there. So we argued and both factories were working at half capacity. So we argued that since these estates are contiguous and canes were already moving between them when one factory would go down, that we need to close the factory. And again, the union was involved, and they sat with the workers and interviewed every single one of them. And the workers were mainly observed in the Enmore factory. Some who did not want to go there stayed on at LBI because the government kept a workshop there for them. 4 persons lost their job. But it was what I'm going through this, and it extends into the bauxite industry too. Yes, and we will talk about bauxite in a moment. Mr. Speaker, the approach was very different. They didn't hear it from the website, a website. They didn't hear it from the news that their jobs are at risk. The unions were not involved. Until now, when the unions went to the meeting, the Gaisuko meeting, they asked several questions. Who made the decision? Of course, they didn't get the answer. And Mr. Speaker, not the chairman of the board nor the CEO met with the unions. On such an important decision, they allowed the staff to meet with the unions. 2,000 people on the breadline, but the staff. And so they asked how many. They were told that some will go to IFLOT. And they asked how many, and how many will be severed. And the answer was, we don't know. And they said, there'll be other activities, diversification. And they asked, what are the activities? And they said, we don't know as yet. We heard in this house 2 sets of explanation. The chairman of the board saying, well, not from this house, the chairman of the board saying, lands given to worker. So we hear about dairy, not livestock and aquaculture here in the house. And then we're hearing about a feasibility study to take place now. What if the feasibility study says it's not feasible? What if it says not feasible? So then it's done. Nobody will get a job there. And so, Mr. Speaker, this is a serious problem. We had offered, the Honorable Member, Mr. Harman, correctly said that we pointed out that given the European Union money for sugar, which was about $111 million US, that if you look at the net contribution from the Treasury to the sugar industry, you will see that it is not as high as is reported. And if you look at investments that still, like the power plant that is at Skeldon, which is an investment that ideally GPL should have made, but is carried on the books. So it's close to $25 million US carried on Gaisuko's book because they supply GPL with the power at below the cost of that GPL would have spent procuring the power from elsewhere. They carry it on the book. And if you look at the nature of the debt, it's about 30-something billion of the 60-something billion in long-term debt could easily be written off. It is, we have done it for other industries. We have done it before for other industries. So, Mr. Speaker, we could easily find resources to fix the factory, and that is what I said. We're willing to work with the government. But the Honorable Member, Mr. Harman, forgot that we had a conversation right here. And I said to him, he said, I saw what you said, and we should meet. And I said, yes, whenever you're ready. But now I have to call them to say, can you have a meeting to help to work together to save the sugar industry? And then this government says it's inclusive. If they have anybody on the table who thinks that they can help in this process, they should be including them. They're either farming out the intellectual work to us now, they want to do that, or, Mr. Speaker, they don't have any desire to fix the problem. Don't have any desire to fix the problem. And why is this so? Is this another assault on an industry that is perceived to be close to the PPP? We've seen it in the rice. We've seen it in the rice industry already. No help for you. So, Mr. Speaker, the thing is very different. Mr. Speaker, paragraph 12 of the affidavit by the Honorable Vice President, Carl Greenidge, spoke about throughout the 90s, Guyman had amassed such enormous losses, and the government had to inject $220 million between 1982 to 1990. Mr. Speaker, if we use 8% interest rate, because that's what discount rates you tend to use, but an interest rate, and we were to compound this $220 million, in today's term, it would yield 1.5 billion US dollars. 1.5 billion US dollars. And we assisted. When we got into office, the industry had already, a company called Minproc had won the contract because of a World Bank loan to prepare the company for privatization. That included severance of some workers, downsizing of the staff, a whole range of things. Minproc was the name of the company. And we continued working over the period, Mr. Speaker, with that program. But we didn't shut down. The idea was either you privatize or you shut it down because of the fiscal, the ISAF that we had at that time, the Enhanced Structural Adjustment Policy. We kept going. And Mr. Speaker, in the past 10 years alone, we have spent over $25 billion in subsidy for electricity to the community, just in the past 10 years. And so if we can help that community, $25 billion, injections into the industry when it mattered, the country could help. Why can't we help the sugar industry now? And Mr. Speaker, prior to all of these activities, even the privatization, what we did, I was looking through and I saw some pictures of some of the staff of the Ministry of Finance. And we went and we walked the entire Region 10, Mr. Speaker. And we developed a diversification plan. We went into West Watuka and we said, here are some agricultural lands, but how are we going to open up these lands? We need a road infrastructure. And people said at that time, we need an incubator for business because, we need new businesses in the area. And they talk about a small loans program. There were other facilities. We came back from Linden, Mr. Speaker, applied for a European Union grant. We got a 12 million euros grant to do that through the LEAP program to help the transformation of that area, because we recognized that the approach had to be to diversify the activities of Linden. Some of the programs were successful, some didn't bear a lot of fruit, but the desire to help, the approach was that you deal with diversification before you put people on the breadline, Mr. Speaker. That was the approach we took. We then came to this Parliament and we passed a special incentive regime that would have given tax benefits only to people investing in that region, not in Region 6 or 2, where our support base was, but in Region 10. We said, if you invest in this region here, you're going to get enhanced benefits, passed by this same Parliament. And I heard when I was abroad, the honorable member spoke about Linden and our involvement in Linden. And Mr. Speaker, from the honorable member from Linden. West Watuka, the road was built. Many people benefited from the small loans program. Amelia's ward, we walked on it and it was bauxite. And I spoke about this last year. Bauxite lands, nothing, and you have a spanking scheme there. Block 22, Victory Valley, all of these places working. The Burnham Drive was in disrepair, we fixed it. And spanking new hospital, a water treatment plant. We did not treat communities differently. Why at this time of trouble can't we help the sugar industry? Why can't we help? And Mr. Speaker, I remember when Alcoa walked away. Alcoa said they wanted to merge ABC and AMC. And the government said, not the government, the opposition at that time, no, that the bauxite industry is black gold and that we shouldn't do this. And Alcoa just walked away. And we didn't let the industry collapse. The government renationalized the industry. We took it back for $1. And then when the Burmine operations had issues in Burmine, and their market collapsed too, we merged the two. The workers asked us to go and sit down with them. I went to a meeting and sat with the workers, Mr. Speaker, to merge the two to preserve the jobs there. That was our approach to the industry. Very, very different approach than this callous behavior that we find from this government. So, Mr. Speaker, because these are our people, whether they live in Linden or they live in Essequibo or Berbice, these are our people, the people of Guyana. These are our people. Mr. Speaker, I heard Mr. Speaker, the low carbon development strategy is the portfolio responsibility, the environment sector, the portfolio responsibility of the honorable member, Mr. Trotman. But Mr. Speaker, I have not seen such any time in our history the squandering of such an opportunity at this scale. The squandering because of ignorance somewhere, I don't know where it is. The squandering because they're trying to prove a political point rather than focus on this huge inheritance of $150 million that one honorable member of this House on the other side went to see the Norwegians. And he said to them when they were in opposition, don't disperse the funds. I met with the Norwegians, Mr. Speaker, and I said, we want the money to be dispersed to Guyana. Not to withhold it, not to withhold. We want the money to be dispersed, Mr. Speaker. And because we want this country to be in the forefront of the provision of global environmental services. We think it could be a new industry, And so, Mr. Speaker, what we heard, as I read in the newspapers, that it was said that the PPP gave out all of the productive lands in the forestry sector. And that the state forests were given out. And Mr. Speaker, the fact is that about 55% of the state forest has been given out so far in our history. 55%, it's about 7 million hectares of 12.5 million hectares. So it's not true that all of our state forests are given out, 55%. Mr. Speaker, of the 55%, just about 40% are under extraction. So that means that about 25%, there is active extraction in about 25% of our forests. Of that, Mr. Speaker, the TSAs, the 4.4 million hectares that were given out, almost half was given out in the pre-1992 era. Barama alone had 1.7 million hectares. The difference, Mr. Speaker, is that we gave out 568 concessions in the state forest permits, totaling about 2 million hectares, close to what Barama has. But there are 73 community forest organizations included there. And the 73 community forest organizations employ directly 3,000 people, and they indirectly 6,000 people. And these are leases that are controlled by large numbers of people. And I dare the government. I heard yesterday they said, take him back. Go to Aichuni, go to Kwakwani, go to the community forest organizations and take it back from the people. It's 10,000 people that you're talking about. 10,000 of them. And Mr. Speaker, they're not creating more jobs, not thinking about people, taking back everything. Everything. Mr. Speaker, so they have all of these people who are out there reliant. They should be helping. But if the argument was that we are raping the forest, then the Norwegians every year, based on payments, Mr. Speaker, send in international assessors. These are people who come in here and examine the deforestation rate for the year. And then we have a MRV system which tracks changes in forest carbon. And what was the extraction rate, Mr. Speaker? The extraction rate in the 2014 MRV report, the deforestation, was 0.062%. 0.062%. And guess what? Most of it came from small mining, not from forestry extraction too. So we were the best stewards of the forest. We kept the forest intact. We negotiated a groundbreaking deal to sell forest carbon. It's the largest per capita carbon deal in the world. It is, you're benefiting from that now. There's $150 million there. We're using $3.1 million from the GRIF to fund, according to this budget, all the things the Honorable Member Cathy Hughes spoke about. It's GRIF money from the telecommunication sector, $3.1 billion coming from that. And most of the things that are going to the Amerindian communities coming from the GRIF that we negotiated, we put in place that you were opposed to. And the forests are intact because they're monitored by an international agreement. And we did this without stymieing the extraction of logs and giving our people a chance to earn a living. We did it without stopping the small miners, because they too have a role to play in the development of the country. They must live the good life too, not just you. So, Mr. Speaker, what we have seen, we have heard the Honorable Member Trotman speaking about this biodiversity offset and that it's one of a kind. Well, in 1972, the boundaries of the Kite Shore was reduced from 45 square miles to 4.5. In 1999, it was increased to 224 square miles. That's the first thing. Now, this is not an indigenous, like with the INDCs. It was not indigenously developed, pushing our rights and our obligations given the international climate agreement, that we have to find a balance between a contributor to a mitigation options to climate change, but also creating opportunities for our people to earn from our productive lands. That was the balance we sought through a comprehensive low-carbon development strategy. But the agenda of the government, whenever they deal with it in a very kind of unregulated way, a way that is very confusing because I'm not clear about their climate strategy until today. But they seem to be driven by external interests. So this biodiversity offset, Guyana Goldfields, as it mentioned in the budget speech, has applied to IFC for some financing. And so we are going to work with Guyana Goldfield, a gold mining company driven by an external agenda, to go to the IFC and talk about this Kite Shore National Park. But what happens to the land rights in Chinapau? Where is the Honorable Member Sidney Alicock, who lectured us on FPIC, free prior informed consent? Has that been obtained from Chinapau for this? Are we not imposing this on the indigenous people? And will it affect their land rights? And we're doing this to partner with a mining company that is seeking to get some financing from IFC. That is how our agenda is driven. It is externally driven. And the Honorable Member, Mr. Trotman, brought this here. Mr. Speaker, if you look at our record, and I don't want to go to the record of the PPP civic government, but you will see the result, the strengthening of the GFC, the forest laws, the international agreements, the enhanced scrutiny, the EU FLEC, external review, the EITI that we spoke about, so that we don't negotiate all deals in secrecy and in the dark, and one day say, oh, we are going to set up a sovereign wealth fund, and the next week say, we want an advance on the money. This is not the approach that you do. There have been many, many cases around the world where, to avoid this, that companies have been caught with political people doing shady deals, and we want to avoid this in Guyana. And the way to do that is to sign on and accelerate the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. And the way to do it is to make public all the agreements and all the requests to the oil company. That is what we need to do, Mr. Speaker, so that the framework, because we will be stuck with this for a very long time in the future. This is important. Mr. Speaker, our natural resources sector is in shambles. It's incompetent management of the natural resources sector. We have no climate change policy. Greening of Bartica is not a climate change policy. Greening, planting trees along the East Coast Highway is not a climate change policy. And people seem to be confused with picking up garbage and greening and putting in sidewalks and planting a few trees with a climate change policy. A climate change policy, it is about, particularly in the context that we put it in, low carbon development strategy. It is how we create new industries for export. The honorable member Carl Greenidge spoke about the only 12% of service exports, although it contributes close to 60% of gross domestic product. Now, what are the sectors we're going to expand? What are the sectors we are going to expand services exports in? We can't do it in the financial services. We can't do it in the creative industries. We can't do it maybe we can do it in tourism, but we don't have the impetus or the initiatives in this budget to do it. But one way we can do this, Mr. Speaker, is to export biodiversity services, educational services, not of a generalized nature, but along climate change. And that is how you expand the service account of the balance of payment. That is how you start getting our economy on a broader footing. And this is what we had started. I don't want to go into the low carbon development strategy in great detail, but that strategy, Mr. Speaker, that strategy had money for adaptation to ensure that our crops can face drought and heavy rainfall without being destroyed. It had money for the shoring of the Conservancy Dam, for the mangrove program, for the transformation of indigenous people's village economy, for the expansion of ICT to the hinterland. And it had money for a series of activities, the food security in the Amerindian areas, the expansion of land rights, titling activities. It had money for the establishment of the biodiversity center at the University of Guyana. And I saw the huge allocation to the University of Guyana. Guess where it's coming from? And the minister spoke extensively from a loan that we had negotiated with the World Bank. So Mr. Speaker, they have not focused on what the climate change policy and link it with development. We're busy here about planting a couple trees along the highway and stuff like that. This is about transforming a country, the economy. This is about creating opportunities, more jobs for university students and foresters and Amerindian people and those scientists who can go into the forest and explore the wealth of it and our biodiversity there. The absence of any vision absolutely on this matter. Mr. Speaker, we have a government that is living in a dream world, Mr. Speaker. They talk about new industries. Let me tell you the new industries that are being created now in Guyana. We have help for the manufacturing industry. But it's to manufacture excuses. Not jobs, not wealth. So the excuses are, oh, we found a bankrupt treasury. Too much money has been smuggled out from gold. $28 billion was stolen through public procurement. We need commissions of inquiry before we do everything. We need studies on VAT and the tax reform. We need every single thing. Excuses. You're manufacturing excuses. That's the only industry that this government has created. Another booming industry, Mr. Speaker, is rent-a-service. Rent-a-service. Get your taxes waived. Make the right donations. Mr. Speaker, that's another industry that's being created. Mr. Speaker, the Commission of Inquiry Industry is thriving. Lots of people getting lots of money and nothing else. Where are the other jobs that are being created? People are losing jobs everywhere. The per diem industry, the travel industry. Honorable Prime Minister, this is thriving too, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the advisors industry, advisors are flowing out of our ears, hundreds of them, all over the place, 32 abroad alone. This is the new type of industry that we are creating. So, Mr. Speaker, I come back to the issue about good life for whom? Good life for whom? And all we can see, Mr. Speaker, is a good life for a select few. Special interests won out in this budget. Special interests. So we reduce taxes on alcohol, but people will pay more for their vehicles. I am calling on this government, Mr. Speaker, to extend the ban on vehicles from 8 years to 12 years, beyond 12 years. I'm calling on them. And the arguments that we heard from some of the members on the other side about the switching. There is no price elasticity. How will people switch? If you look at the differential in cost, even for the new vehicle with lower taxes, there's absolutely no elasticity between the two. So people will simply not be able to afford new vehicles. They will have to keep the same vehicles on the road longer. They will have to spend more on maintenance, etc., more on these things. They'll have to keep the old tires on longer. Not longer. There's nothing. So please, and then also for the productive sectors, for trucks, Mr. Speaker, I'm asking that we remove the restriction for the productive sectors of our economy. We're asking that the firearm licenses for farmers and Amerindians be waived or kept at their old rate. Mr. Speaker, we're asking for a rethink of this tax compliance for everything, for everyone who access government services. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you will see the irony in it, that here the members of parliament on the other side voted against people seeing their tax records. But on the other hand, they want people to pay taxes first before they access government services. Two standards, Mr. Speaker. I'm asking that it be reconsidered. I'm asking that the closure of Wells Estate be reconsidered. I'm asking that help be given to the rice industry that may not even have a fiscal implication. Could the Minister of Finance sit with the central bank and the commercial banks to try to renegotiate some of the loans for the rice farmers who are bankrupt now, so they have longer repayment period, waiving some of the taxes, helping in small ways. This matter. I would ask that they help the small miners so they don't have to come out for the tax compliance, that they can access the duty-free concessions that were announced last year faster so that they get help. Many of them are faced with bankruptcy, that they introduce a sliding scale for the royalty payment and to waive some of the acreage fees. This can be done for the manufacturing sectors too. They can give some help. Reduce the cost of electricity, lower the cost of fuel. That will have a big impact. Mr. Speaker, even with the faulty analyses and even with the inept policy measures, we have time now to fix these things. We have time to fix this if this government is serious about the economic development in Guyana. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated to you earlier, that we, Mr. Speaker, may want indigenous people.
Honourable Member, I must tell you that we've passed the hour-and-a-half mark.
Yes?
And
okay. Maybe I just...
And we are in danger of hearing the speech.
No, you're not going to hear the same thing, yes.
So that there must be a time when I will have to call this.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, we would like the discipline services to be paid now too, immediately, because the discipline services don't have any wages negotiation. Mr. Speaker, there's one last point I'll make. We've heard a lot about settlement of tax cases and about settlements and the Rudisa arrangement that came to this parliament. First of all, we got into trouble because of the unconscionable action of the opposition at that time. That we exposed the country to liability. We fought it to the end because we recognized that the people who went to the Caribbean Court of Justice on behalf of Rudisa admitted that they were on the invoicing. They admitted this. This is public knowledge. And yet, we have not done an offset. We are not representing the interests of the people of this country. We are not. And we should have done an offset, Mr. Speaker. And we heard recently about DIPCON and how we left that problem that they have to settle now. Mr. Speaker, I am familiar with that issue. That was a fixed price contract for the road between Mahaika and Rosignol. We could not depart from the fixed price contract, although the cost escalated, because this was an IDB contract. This matter has been long outstanding for many years. So if we were so corrupt, we would have settled it. If we would have settled it, why is it being settled only now? Is the interest of this state being represented well? And so Mr. Speaker, I hope, Mr. Speaker, that we look at these things carefully. The government is very prone to accusations. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said to you before, this government has once again, I thought it was different this year. Last year, we argued that it was a short year, they were new in office, and that maybe for that reason, they were trying to depart from the tradition. But having taken a stand, Mr. Speaker, last year I said that the People's Progressive Party will never allow the members of the government to make us victims in this chamber and anywhere. Never. Because we are proud of the role we played in changing this country. There isn't a bigger dollop of patriotism on that side that God gave them. All of us are patriots, Mr. Speaker. And therefore...
Remember, I must interrupt to inquire, to let you know that we will allow 15 minutes more.
15 minutes more? Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. All right, I just needed 3 minutes more, actually. Okay, so Mr. Speaker, there is a bigger of patriotism. And what bothered me profoundly is this almost flippant way of dealing with colors. I mentioned to you. I was president of Guyana for 12 years, Mr. Speaker. Never once did I wear a party color to a state function. Never once. Because when I was president, and I insisted that the ministers do, and that happened throughout, because you belong to the people, all of you, on the other side, all of the people, just as we on this side belong to them too. We belong to the people of this country. Imagine the election season is over. How does a PPP supporter, Mr. Speaker, come and feel that the colors that a minister now really represents him or her if they insist on being so divisive? And so, Mr. Speaker, once again, until this House fixes the problem, until the other side agrees with something that has become an age-old tradition of this House, where the leader of the opposition is the penultimate speaker, we will not listen to the debate of the speakers afterward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the honourable member. The honourable members, I see you rise. I have not risen the assembly. I do not know how we're the assembly. I'm speaking now to say that we have the privilege of speaking in the assembly for 1 hour and 40 minutes, and then honourable members rise and would not see the end of this debate. I do not understand it. I am bound to say that there is something of a, if the people to whom so much reference was made today, if the people of Guyana are listening, they must wonder. Maybe they want an explanation as much as from using the words of the leader of the opposition. The government members must explain. Maybe the leaders of opposition and the opposition members must explain to the people of Guyana why is it that the debate is not ended. So maybe there's room for reconsideration about walking out. Thank you. What we have now is an interesting situation. I am tempted to suggest that in the light of the fact that there are 2 speakers remaining, that we, so to speak, continue. The next speaker would be the Honorable Moses Nagamutu.
Oh boy, you cut and run. Can't take it, huh? It's tradition. Cut and run. Cut and run. What a shame. You claim to represent the people. You can't accept the verdict of the Guyanese people. You come, you cuss, and you abuse them, and then you walk out.
Mr. Speaker, may I crave your indulgence, please? I'm just looking at the time and I see 5 minutes to 4, and I was wondering whether we couldn't take the break now and then come back to conclude the 2 speakers. Sorry for going that way. Thank you.